generally the trend of urban redevelopment and revitalization in cities across the country, and specifically talk about New Brunswick, which has seen a lot. It's an interesting example. So one of the things we're seeing is kind of the history of it is, cities were the population centers in the country, and then you had the rise of the automobile, and highways got built everywhere, suburbanization, white flight, cities kind of emptied out, and that created a lot of the urban problems that we all hear about in like the 60s and 70s, and concentrations of poverty and loss of wealth. But we're seeing a reversal of that in the last like 10, 20 years, 30 years maybe. Part of that we're seeing now is the demographic shift in the country, what people are calling this barbell demographics, where you have two of the largest demographic groups in the country that now want to go back to cities. You have baby boomers who are retiring. They have these big mansions maybe with 4 bedrooms, but just the 2 of them now because their kids have left. They don't want to have a house anymore. They don't want to have to worry about driving everywhere as they're getting older, so they're looking to downsize to maybe a condo in the city. And you also have millennials, which are technically defined as people born 1980 and later, who don't want to live in the suburbs. They want to be near their friends. They want to spend their money going out. They're not, they don't want the white picket fence world. They want a much more social world. There was a recent poll where 85% of millennials say they would rather give up a car than the internet. Like the majority don't even want to own a car if they can avoid it. So that's driving a lot of the population surges that you see in Brooklyn and hipster Brooklyn and things like that. So here in New Jersey, what we're seeing, because of the New York City growth, massive growth, Hoboken and Jersey City. I mean, the way Hoboken was 30 years ago is the way people talk about Trenton today. Or some of our other distressed urban population centers. But now everyone's clamoring to live in Hoboken, as close to the path station as they can. You can spend well over $2,000 for a 1-bedroom apartment because of the demand. And you see that in downtown Jersey City, which has 3 path stops getting into New York, but maybe not necessarily Jersey City Heights or Journal Square or Greenville in Jersey City. Those are farther away from mass transit. Those are still struggling areas. And there's a whole other issue with gentrification we'll get to in a little bit. And you see that in Hudson County as a whole. Hudson County's population peak was in 1940 at 690,000 people. It got down to almost at 500,000, I think, at one point. No, that's probably not right. It got down to below 600,000 by 1990, and then in 2000 it went up to 608, and 2010 to 634, which is massive. And Hoboken specifically went from 38,000 in the year 2000 to over 50,000 in the year 2012. But Hoboken used to be 70,000 way back in the 40s. So again, you see that even though we're resurging back in the cities, it's not what it used to be. Actually, another really interesting statistic I just heard. Mass transit ridership in the United States is, in whole numbers, what it was in like 1957. But as a country, we're like at least twice the population as we were then. We just, a lot of us rode mass transit back then. And also in Newark, which is also our biggest city, but also one of our most distressed, saw its population go up for the first time since it started sinking after the 40s. It only went up about 3,000 people, but I think Newark is now 273,000. Jersey City's like 247. And again, Newark used to be over 400,000 people back in the day. So New Brunswick is interesting because New Brunswick doesn't have the advantages that Hoboken and Jersey City have, where everyone is getting priced out of Manhattan, so they have to come across the river and take that 20-minute, 30-minute mass transit ride. You're in New Brunswick, that's an hour ride into Manhattan. You could live somewhere like Westfield, along any of a number of transit lines. But what has New Brunswick done? So a little history. New Brunswick, like most cities in New Jersey, had either riots or civil disturbances, or whichever way you want to call them, back in like the 60s. And Johnson & Johnson was there. Johnson & Johnson was there because the Johnson brothers were on a train from New York, and then halfway through they saw a building for sale, and they realized they were halfway between New York and Philly, and it would be a great place for them to have their business. But their world headquarters was there, and they were ready to pull out because the city had gotten pretty bad, pretty dangerous. So they commissioned a report, the American Cities Corporation, to look into New Brunswick, and the consultants decided the city has potential. Like, this can be revitalized. You have Rutgers, State University here. One of New Brunswick's nicknames is the Hub City, because they are in the middle of a the Northeast Corridor train line, and the Turnpike, the Parkway's not too far away, Route 1, 287, they're all near there. So, but they said that this can only happen if everybody works together. This includes major corporate players, the city, the state university, everybody needs to come together. So, in order to do that, they created something called New Brunswick Tomorrow, which is kind of like a community development corporation for New Brunswick. At the time, they were focused on the development of human capital, so like service provision, and also on real estate development. 6 months after that, New Brunswick Tomorrow spun off DevCo, which is the New Brunswick Development Corporation, which is the nonprofit real estate developer for New Brunswick. Almost every redevelopment project in downtown New Brunswick that's happened in the last 30 years has been a DevCo project. So there's been a strong concerted effort by active players to see the revitalization happen. So some of the big projects, I'm sure almost everyone here has hung out in New Brunswick at one time or another, right? We did the 2 sessions there. So if anybody's familiar with the train station, just north of the train station is the intersection of George Street and Albany. It's the 2 major roads in New Brunswick. Johnson & Johnson World Headquarters is there. That building was designed by IMPay. They redid that after they decided they were going to stay and made a massive investment in the city. They also helped fund across the street from there an entire city block, Kilmer Square. Next to that, DevCo did the Farron Mall, which is this giant super block of office space and everything across from the train station. And across from Johnson & Johnson, there's another massive building called the Golden Triangle, which Johnson & Johnson actually leases every single square foot of space in there, except for the bank at the bottom. And then down the street, there's another massive project called City Market. And kind of at the time of the 80s, these big super blocks were seen as the way to do revitalization. Just plow everything out of the way and put up this giant tower that has got 2 entrances. It's a little bit ridiculous. Urban planning is kind of moving away from that now for more smaller scale mixed-use type projects. So some of the things that the new wave of urban planning and DevCo has been doing now in New Brunswick, you can see the Gateway Transit Village, which is the tallest building in the city. It's about 34 stories, I think. It's 150 condos, 42 apartments. About 20% of them are classified as affordable. There will be a 3-story Barnes & Noble in there. The second escalator in the city will be in there. The first one being in the train station. The university is also getting more involved in trying to weave itself a little bit more into the fabric of the city, because I heard that in the 70s, if you were a student on College Avenue in Rutgers, you didn't cross Albany Street, because that was, if you crossed Albany Street, you were going to get mugged. But today, Rutgers built Rockhoff Hall, which is this massive dorm complex right in downtown. There's a Rutgers bus stop outside of it, and the students really mingle with the city. And some other DevCo projects they're doing right now, they're building a gym, Robert Wood Johnson Wellness Center. It's going to have an Olympic-sized swimming pool. It's going to be the only public pool, the only pool in the city that the public can have access to. 5th graders in New Brunswick City Schools are going to, I think for 8 weeks, have free access to it so they can all learn how to swim, which right now they can't. There will also be a Fresh Grocer grocery store. Now, one of the problems that students, when the community had at Rutgers, or when student recruiter for Bow's team talking to out-of-state students, where do you do your grocery shopping? Well, we go to Highland Park across the river, because there's no big grocery store in New Brunswick. There's lots of bodegas, there's lots of, I don't want to call them low-end grocers, but they're smaller, kind of like City Mart, Seatown, which is no longer Seatown, it's now been bought out, it's now called Bravo, Albany. But now the Fresh Grocer, which is the Pennsylvania brand, is coming in 45,000 square feet, which a suburban massive grocery store might get up to 60,000. It's going to be an enormous grocery store right downtown. And also there's been a bunch of private, large-scale development. Bourret developers, they put up One Spring Street, which Alvarez lives in, I'm sure you guys know. It's that giant building downtown. And they're also going to build another 16-story complex across from the Robert Wood Johnson Hospital, 235 condos, 16 stories, all glass. And Penrose is building another 100 market rate residential units in downtown across from the dorms, which nobody would have believed you if you had told them this was going to happen in New Brunswick 30 years ago. But this isn't without its controversies. Now, Emily and I were students at the Glasgow School, studying urban planning, and one of our professors protested DEFCON when he was a student at Rutgers. One of the things they did, if you're familiar with New Brunswick, down on Nielsen Street, there are all these condos and like townhouses near like where Frog and the Peach and Delta's restaurant are, down on Benner Street. That's Harem Square. Used to be Harem Marketplace. Used to be these beautiful like 19th century wood frame buildings, but it's a lot of disinvestment. And so the city just plowed it all forward. And people flipped out. But they did it, they built it. Now if you want to live there, it's like $600,000 for a small townhouse. Memorial Homes, giant public housing project right by the highway. The city imploded that in 2002 in conjunction with the Brunswick Housing Authority. And they built Hope 6 low-density public housing, which is better for people, the low-density housing rather than the giant high-rise. But they weren't able to place everyone in there that used to be in the public housing project. There are less units in the project. So one of the things you get, you look at all these giant towers and say, this is fantastic, with all this revitalization. We need to ask, what was there before? Where did those people go? Where did all the poor people who used to live in Hoboken go? They're not living right next to the pass station. Where are they moving out to Jersey City Heights? Let's see, what else? And other parts of New Brunswick are also clamoring for more attention. One of the things Chris Palladino, the executive director of DEFCON, talks about is critical mass around the train station, try to bring up development there to spur private development. But then you had areas like Remsen Avenue, which is a little bit more working class, and there's a nonprofit there of Catholic Charities called Unity Square Partnership, and they're struggling to get attention. They want the city to invest in not a massive redevelopment project that would have fit in with the neighborhoods, also attached homes, but they want streetscape improvements, they want better lighting, they're looking at safety issues, they want better access to healthy food, but the city's kind of ignoring that in favor of the downtown trying to bring in business development. So we have all this development now, we have all this revitalization of cities, we have tons of dollars coming in. Even in the midst of this financial recession, Brunswick seeing lots of interesting projects. But you also need to keep in mind not just the residents you're trying to bring into the city, but the residents that live there. And, how are you going to balance those two things? Is it a good idea to clear out all these properties to put up a giant tower? Maybe. What about the people that live there now? What about this giant project? Is it all going to be $2,000 a month for one-bedroom apartments? Like, where do other people know? This gets co-ed affordable housing. Anyway, so that's kind of revitalization in a nutshell, especially in New Brunswick. That's about it.